Okay, so if you think about it, we're at a turning point globally. The Cold War is long over, the old power structures are decaying, and the world is essentially rewiring itself, not through war, not through domination, but through something much more strategic: influence, smart influence. And one country that's playing this game exceptionally well without loud headlines, without global confrontations, is India. Let's unpack that. Let's break this down from first principles. See, most people think diplomacy is about speeches and flags, maybe shaking hands, signing documents, smiling for cameras, but that's not how the world actually works. That's theater, optics. The real game, the actual mechanics of influence, is more like system engineering. Smart diplomacy isn't about choosing sides, it's about building optionality. It's about positioning yourself at the center of multiple strategic networks, so that no matter how the world tilts, you're always relevant. Think of it like designing a spacecraft. You don't just plan for one type of orbit, you design with redundancies. If one system fails, another takes over. The goal is survivability and performance over the long arc, not short-term drama. India's approach today is an example of that. It's not reactive, it's architectural. They're not saying we belong to this camp or that camp. Instead, they're looking at long-term leverage, energy security, trade lanes, AI partnerships, semiconductors, and engaging each player based on how that player helps India build its future. It's such engineering logic applied to geopolitics. Now, compare this to traditional diplomacy, which often looks like emotionally charged tribalism. Country A gets attacked, so country B retaliates, not because it helps them, but because they're stuck in an old allegiance model. That's inefficient. It's like using a 1990s modem in a world of satellite internet. Smart diplomacy, on the other hand, is about iteration. You test small alliances, adapt, optimize. You respond based on value, not sentiment. You expand based on your own operating system, not someone else's. And here's the genius. It's not loud. See, in Silicon Valley, the loudest startup isn't always the most successful. It's the one that solves the deepest problem, quietly, efficiently, consistently. That's how India is approaching the world. They're not yelling from the rooftops. They're moving deals quietly with the US. While still maintaining a 70-year defense pipeline with Russia, they're helping build digital public goods across Africa, while also investing in clean energy partnerships with the UAE. All parallel, all intentional. This isn't sick confusion. It's modular design. India is acting like a country that understands systems, dependencies, and timing. That's rare. They've recognized that power isn't in alliances anymore. It's in flexibility. It's in economic leverage. It's in being needed by everyone, but owned by no one. That's smart diplomacy. It's not about being unpredictable. It's about being non-linear. It's about staying in motion, so no one can box you in. And just like in physics, the object that keeps moving forward with momentum is hardest to stop. That's India right now. Okay, so it's one thing to talk about smart diplomacy in theory, but the question is, what does it look like in practice? Let's zoom in on India's actual strategy. If you analyze it like a system, not a country, you'll see something very elegant: multi-threaded execution. Low noise, high leverage. Start with Russia. Now, most Western countries cut off ties with Russia after the Ukraine invasion. Big headlines, sanctions, condemnations. And yet India didn't follow that path. They increased oil imports from Russia, bought at discounted rates, resold to Europe in refined form. Result: cheaper energy at home, trade profits abroad, all while staying officially neutral. That's not chaos, that's optimization. This move wasn't emotional, it was engineering. India looked at its fuel dependency, like checking a critical subsystem in a rocket, and made sure it didn't fail under external pressure. At the same time, they didn't alienate the West, far from it. Look at the United States. India is deepening defense ties with the US, joint military exercises, tech transfers, fighter jet production. The US even invited India to the G7 and Indo-Pacific alliances like Quad. That's high-level trust, strategic integration. And here's the smart part. India doesn't allow that trust to become control. They're part of Quad, but not part of NATO. They buy weapons from America and Russia simultaneously. They speak to China and still hold the line on the border. It sets asymmetric diplomacy. flexible, modular. Same logic with Israel. India collaborates heavily with Israel on agriculture, defense, cyber intelligence, but does so without disrupting ties in the Arab world. That's not easy. It takes signal balancing, like tuning a satellite to receive multiple frequencies without interference. Now let's talk about tech diplomacy. India's made one of the smartest plays in soft power, exporting infrastructure, not ideology. Instead of lecturing countries, they offer tools, UPI. Their digital payment system is now being adopted in Southeast Asia and the Middle East. Aadhaar, the biometric ID system, has inspired similar programs in Africa. Why is this powerful? Because systems scale. Once a country adopts your tech, they build long-term dependencies around you. They upgrade with you. That's way more powerful than a one-time treaty or photo op. India's model is non-intrusive, but deeply strategic. It's what I call silent architecture, where you build the framework quietly, and when people finally notice, you're already in control of the ecosystem. No invasions, no lectures, just relevance by utility. So when people say, India is playing both sides, what they miss, India is not playing sides. They're playing the system. They've studied how global influence flows and built bridges across all networks without becoming anyone's node. It sits diplomacy as engineering, and it sits working. Here's the thing most people don't realize. In diplomacy, as in engineering, the loudest voice doesn't win. We live in a world that often mistakes volume for value. If someone tweets loudly, gives a fiery speech, or dominates headlines, we assume they're in control. But in real systems, in real strategy, the most effective actors are usually the quietest ones. Think of how a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket actually reaches orbit. It doesn't announce every altitude, it just performs. Every phase is calculated. Every silence is intentional. It's focused on mission over attention. India SIP's diplomatic rise is a lot like that. It doesn't rely on threats. It doesn't posture. You won't find India giving lectures at the UN every month, or launching emotional PR campaigns. Instead, what you'll find is this, a steady pattern of disciplined, non-flashy moves that consistently increase leverage and trust. Let me give you a few examples. When India faced border tensions with China, it didn't erupt into endless public rhetoric. Instead, it quietly enhanced infrastructure in the Himalayas, increased defense procurement, and accelerated alliances like the Quad. No shouting, just preparation, just movement. Same with Russia. While the rest of the world was picking sides, India remained publicly neutral, but behind the scenes, it activated energy security, maintained military relations, and continued trade, while still strengthening ties with the US at the same time. That's not passivity, that's control, that's restraint, and restraint in a volatile world is a form of dominance. There's a mental model I use a lot, signal versus noise. In engineering, you want to maximize signal and eliminate noise. India's diplomacy is very high signal, very low noise. Because here's the truth. Countries that constantly announce their moves are usually trying to prove something. But when you're actually building influence, you don't need to talk about it. It just becomes obvious over time. That SIP's what India is doing. Look at UPI. India built a digital payments infrastructure so efficient, so scalable, that now other countries are adopting it. And India didn't need to run an ad campaign about it. The utility spoke louder than any slogan. Or consider vaccine diplomacy during COVID. While some countries hoarded supply or politicized it, India sent vaccines to dozens of developing nations, not with fanfare, just action. It's the same logic I use at Tesla or SpaceX. Don't sell the idea, build the solution. People will figure it out when it works. India is applying that same principle to diplomacy, quiet influence, strategic patience, high-function performance with low attention-seeking behavior. In a world full of megaphones, India is mastering the art of leverage through silence. And in the long run, the countries that don't need to shout because they've already engineered their relevance will shape the system. That SIP's not weakness. That SIP's design. If you step back, like really zoom out, and look at the global landscape from a systems design perspective, one thing becomes clear. India is uniquely positioned, and not by accident. In any global system, whether you're designing satellite networks, neural nets, or supply chains, there are nodes that just receive, and there are nodes that connect. And the most valuable node in any complex system is the bridge node. India is becoming that bridge node. It's one of the only countries in the world that can, and does, speak to the United States, Russia, China, Israel, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, Africa, all at the same time, and none of them fully reject it. Why? Because India doesn't come to dominate. It comes to cooperate while building its own core autonomy. It sits like the Tesla supercharger network. At first, no one wanted to join. Everyone was building their own thing. But over time, we made it open, made it reliable, and suddenly everyone wanted in. Not because we demanded it, but because the system worked. That's how India is moving, not as a challenger to the system, but as a platform within the system. That's how bridge nodes work. They gain power by being needed. Look at trade. India is a top destination for manufacturing diversification, post-COVID, post-China dependency. Look at talent. Indian professionals lead in Silicon Valley, AI, and research globally. Look at diplomacy. India leads the global south while sitting in talks with G7 leaders. Look at energy. It's in OPEC meetings, imports from Russia, builds green hydrogen plants all at once. Look at space. India just landed on the moon near the South Pole with 1/10 the cost. That's range. That's credibility. That's strategic modularity. India can sit at 5 different tables and still build its own. From a geopolitical standpoint, this kind of versatility is rare. Countries usually exist within one ecosystem, US-led, China-led, or non-aligned. But India has effectively created a 4th operating system. India-led optionality. No heavy alignment, no dependence, just relevance. And the world is adapting to that, not because they're forced to, but because they want to. That's the key difference. Systems that pull are stronger than systems that push. India is pulling global attention, not by claiming authority, but by creating value, by showing that a country can be sovereign, cooperative, innovative, and still culturally intact. That's what I call asymmetric influence, and India has it. It's not the biggest army, not the richest GDP, but it's the one building the most bridges while keeping its foundation solid. And in a world where power is no longer top-down but network-driven, bridge builders win. So let's talk about something that's extremely underrated in both engineering and geopolitics: restraint. When you're designing a rocket, or any high-stress machine, you have to build in tolerance, not just for pressure, but for the ability to not react too fast, reacting too quickly to every small signal. That's how you crash. Same with diplomacy. And this is something India is doing very well, even if most people don't notice it. See, the world today is extremely reactive. You insult one country online, and 50 others take sides. One sanction, one missile, one border violation, and everyone starts signaling. Tweet wars, media frenzy, public outrage, lots of emotion, very little outcome. India, in contrast, tends to hold, observe, calculate, wait, and only respond when it aligns with long-term goals. That's not hesitation. That's system-level control. It sits restraint as power. Let's take a real-world example, the border standoff with China. There was tension, there were casualties, but India didn't go nuclear on social media. They didn't run screaming into every Western alliance or shut down trade out of pure emotion. Instead, they quietly built new roads, repositioned military assets, negotiated at multiple levels, and moved forward without becoming volatile. That's what I mean by strategic restraint. Or look at US sanctions or pressure tactics. In other regions, this leads to extreme pivoting, either full rejection or blind loyalty. But India? They balance. They say, sure, we still do business, but not at the cost of autonomy. They buy US fighter jets and Russian missile systems at the same time. That's not chaos. That's engineering. It's like designing a system with dual power inputs. One goes down, the other keeps the machine running. Strategic restraint is also evident in how India deals with provocation from media and soft power narratives. Whether it's criticism of its policies, religious tensions, or global pressure on human rights, the response is rarely a loud PR campaign. Instead, it's measured, often internal, and focused on outcomes. You see, when you're working on cutting-edge technology, your worst enemy is overreaction. Same applies to geopolitics. The countries that scream the loudest often reveal their insecurities. The ones that move deliberately tend to have control. And control isn't about suppressing action. It's about choosing when to act and when not to. India's restraint, whether it's on military action, digital retaliation, or global alignment is not a weakness. It's signal processing, it's command architecture. It's knowing that influence isn't won in the moment, it's accumulated over time. So while others exhaust themselves reacting, India is conserving energy, expanding quietly, and designing its own future. That SIP's not passive, that SIP's precision. Let's talk about second-order effects, the ripple outcomes that happen when you introduce a new system that works better than the old one. In engineering, we often see this when someone disrupts a legacy industry, whether it's electric cars, reusable rockets, or AI infrastructure. The ripple effect doesn't just upgrade performance, it changes behavior. It changes how people think about what's possible. And right now, India's smart diplomacy is doing exactly that, on the global stage. Not by force, not by pushing an ideology, but by offering something far more powerful, a viable model. See, for decades, smaller nations around the world have operated under this assumption. You either align with the West and follow their rules, or you align with China or Russia and accept different costs. There wasn't really a third option. Until now. India is quietly showing that a country, especially one from the global south, can rise without becoming a proxy. It can modernize without importing foreign values, and it can lead without dominating. This is a big deal. Because models scale, other countries are watching, especially in Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and what they start seeing is a country that builds affordable technology that actually works at scale, like UPI, Aadhaar, digital governance tools, maintains cultural and political independence without becoming isolated, partners with everyone from the US to Iran without being controlled by anyone, innovates in space, energy, defense, and medicine, with lower budgets and higher efficiency than many Western powers. That's not just strategy, that's a proof of concept. India's not selling this model, it's not marketing it, it's just living it, quietly, iteratively. And in doing so, it's creating a new software layer for global diplomacy, one that others can clone. This matters. Because the 21st century is going to be less about empires and more about ecosystems, less about dominance and more about influence networks, and ecosystems thrive on interoperability, not uniformity. India isn't instead trying to build an empire, it's building compatibility. And compatibility is what brings systems together. That's why countries are increasingly choosing to work with India in infrastructure, energy, trade, and tech, not because they're forced to, but because it works. Because it offers long-term optionality, not dependency. The old, global order was binary. The new one is modular. And in a modular world, the actor that offers plug-and-play trust wins. That sips the ripple effect. And it's not just about India, it's about showing that alternative models can emerge, that new systems can be designed from the ground up by countries that once had no voice at all. So this isn't just India SIP's moment. It sends a signal to the rest of the world. You can build your own system, you can design your own relevance, you can architect your own influence, and the future will welcome it. So, what does this all actually mean? It means that the old rules of global influence, based on military alliances, ideological blocs, and economic pressure, are no longer sufficient. The world is shifting, quietly, decentralizing, and the countries that understand systems, not just politics, will lead this transition. India is not trying to dominate the system, it's doing something smarter, it's designing its position within it. Now, India's model isn't perfect, no country's is, but here's what matters. It's iterating, it's adjusting, and it's offering proof that a rising power doesn't need to scream, conquer, or conform. It just needs to be reliable, adaptable, and useful to the world. That's what smart diplomacy is. That's what system design looks like at the international level. And if more countries follow this principle, not by copying India, but by learning the thinking behind the moves, we'll start to see a more balanced, efficient, and multipolar global order. One where power isn't hoarded, but distributed. One where relevance isn't inherited, but earned. One where influence isn't forced, but offered. And in that world, India is becoming a key node. Not by accident, not by dominance, but by design. Thank you.